Hi, my name is Ernesto, and today I wanted to talk about the first comic book story that I've ever bought or read, and that's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. So I've always been really into superheroes since I was a little kid. I grew up in the early 2000s watching the Spider-Man movies that were coming out at the time. I remember being a huge fan of the Daredevil movie, even though it's not fondly looked on now, but I loved it. Watched Batman the Animated Series, the Justice League cartoons, and all those forms of media just really shaped me. And I was there when I was 10 years old for the first Iron Man movie, which launched the MCU, and have been following the MCU since. And have always been a fan of DC as well, but wasn't super interested in the Zack Snyder vein of things, and so I haven't seen all those films. So when it was announced that James Gunn would take over, and his announcement for what the slate was going to look like over a year ago now, he had a lot of plans for various characters that would show up, and I came to the realization that I just didn't know much about a lot of those characters, even really well-known characters like the Green Lantern or Wonder Woman. I didn't really know much about them. I'd never gone into those characters, nor for me have they been really at the forefront of popular culture like Superman and Batman have, for example. So I decided I was really, really interested in the DC vein of things. So I wanted to do a little bit of research, go into what I should read first. And when James Gunn announced that he was going to be making a Supergirl film based off of a comic book, basically making an adaptation of that story, I thought, I've never been in a position that I've seen others in where they know a story and that story gets adapted into a movie, for example, and they watch the movie and can make comparisons or understand references or remember that moment in the comic book. I've never been in that position. So I decided to get the book and read it so that I could be one of those people. So I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the book from the perspective of someone who's super new to comic books in general, and tell you what I think. So like I mentioned, I didn't know much about several heroes, Supergirl being one of them. I kind of knew that she is Superman's cousin, and I was aware of the show on CW, but I never checked that out, and have only really seen pictures of Supergirl, and I didn't really have an opinion on her, but just sort of perceived her as the same as Superman. And what intrigued me about what James Gunn had said about Supergirl when he announced it was that this was a different take on the character, who's much more jaded and not basically just a one-to-one copy of Superman, but in female form. This is a character with similar powers, but different experiences than Superman, and I thought that was really interesting. So, picked up the book, and the first thing I thought when reading this was how much I love the striking artwork of this book. I love the use of different shades of blues, greens, reds, and purples to depict this really cosmic story. It's planned that the film is a big science fiction epic film, and I understand why after reading the book. The scope of this sort of reminds me a little bit of the character and color of the Guardians of the Galaxy films by James Gunn. Just pretty bold, vibrant, a little weird, full of aliens and different worlds, and worlds with dinosaurs on them and monsters and blobs that talk to you. It's actually quite cool. So I'll talk about a few things in the story, so maybe light spoilers for the story, but I'm not going to give away the end of the story or anything like that. But I did want to talk about a few things. Firstly, the characters. It's narrated by Ruthie, who's a young girl whose father gets killed and is devastated about it, and then finds Supergirl and sort of convinces her to through a series of a few events, sort of convinces her to join her on a quest to find her father's killer and bring him to justice. And so we follow Ruthie and Kara? I'll just call her Kara. Ruthie and Kara basically following the tracks of this guy as he goes throughout the universe and causes havoc. So we go through tons of different planets and meet a bunch of aliens, and as the story continues, Ruthie, who is a little naive to the rest of the galaxy, comes to get to know Kara, who tries to sort of shut out other things. You can sort of tell by the way she's depicted in the artwork and in her dialogue that there's something weighing on her, or that she's experienced something really heavy. And that's shown to us in a later issue in the story, which is basically her origin of having survived the destruction of Krypton by living with everyone else who survived on just a little chunk that's floating off into space. And the viability of that little chunk is declining and people are dying, and for her own good she's sent to Earth to join her cousin Kal-El. And I thought that drove really interesting parallels between her and Ruthie, because she has the same values as Superman, to look out for the little people and to stand up for those who can't fight for themselves. But it seems like she tries really hard to continue to believe in the goodness of people, because there are many horrors that she comes across, even in this story, that I'll admit are pretty heavy. So I don't know if this is the best introduction to Supergirl out there, but this is a really interesting character, and it makes me really excited to see the movie adaptation. And I'm curious to see, because it's known that Jason Momoa is playing Lobo, who isn't in this story, but apparently was in first draft of this story early on. So I'm curious to see how he'll fit in. I feel like a character like Lobo, which I also don't know much about, but I feel like a character like him could fit very easily into a story like this, especially with certain bad people that show up here, or if he's out to hunt Supergirl for some other unrelated thing and their paths cross. And I'm really curious to see how it all goes down. And there are also moments where Kara just is so overcome with emotion. She has to hold back her anger and her despair when she comes across a lot of situations, because she's just so powerful. If she lets loose, it can destroy everything around her. So there's a moment where she flies into the sun in order to sort of let loose and scream, so that she doesn't hurt anybody, because she's just that powerful. But despite all of the horrible things that has happened to her and all the horrible things that she comes across, she always tries to fight to do what is the right thing to do. So in the story, we come across space pirates who wreak havoc in several different planets, different situations and other planets. And as Kara and Ruthie come across different societies, they try to help them in the wake of her father's killer, Krem, and the space pirates that he's traveling with, basically following the trail of destruction that they're leaving behind. There's a character I've never heard of, Comet, the super horse, in here. When he popped out, I was like, whoa, what is that? Never come across the concept of Comet before. Seems really awesome, though. And man, the art is just beautiful in here and really striking. There's a sort of heavy pathos to this story, which makes it sort of sit with you even after you've finished reading. And as a new comic reader, there were moments where I was a little confused on basically how a comic is presented. There were moments where you're in the middle of a scene and then it just cuts away to something completely different, or the story ends. I'm like, did I miss something? Did I skip a page? And so I came to realize that there's many moments where you have to sort of read between the lines, or look at the panels of art and sort of come to your own conclusions for certain situations, or what a character is thinking, or what happens in between panels. Because I was sort of almost reading it like a book, just reading dialogue bubble to dialogue bubble to bubble to bubble, and neglecting the art, and then kind of going back and thinking about the dialogue again, but in the context of everything that I see in the panel, and maybe the time it takes, and just imagining everything happening in my head. So that to me is a bit of an adjustment as someone who typically reads just books rather than a graphic novel or a comic book. So after reading this, I decided to go into more stories of characters that I don't know. So I got a Wonder Woman comic. I don't know anything about Wonder Woman, so I found the story and read that one. I have him here. So this is Wonder Woman Outlaw, I read this. The second volume of this is out, and I plan on getting that real soon. Also started reading some Superman, so my first Superman book is For All Seasons. I really, really enjoyed this one. I love the art in this one. I'm currently reading All-Star Superman. This one was a bit more confusing for me to get into because there are a lot of characters that I'm not familiar with, and it's super sci-fi heavy, which is really cool. It's just, it introduces a lot of things that I'm like, wait, what is that? What am I looking at? What am I reading at? And then through context clues, sort of piecing things together. But I'll probably pick up a bit more on a second read through or when I get more familiar with the Superman mythos. And then I got this, which is Batman Year 1 and 2 out of the DC Finest line. This line is really interesting to me. I plan on getting more like the Wonder Woman one. I've heard great things about the Gail Simone run of Wonder Woman, and that has most of that run. I assume that there will be a follow-up, a DC Finest follow-up to that, and I like the way these look. I think they're quite beautiful. I also want to get this Superman 1 first superhero edition, just to sort of have that bit of comic book history. There are a lot of these that are coming out. I feel like my taste in comic books is probably from the mid to late 80s and beyond, but maybe I'll check out some older comics. So anyway, as I go through these, I definitely have a list of more books and stories that I see people recommend online for various characters. So I want to check out Green Lantern for sure. I know very, very little about that world and that mythos, and I'm really excited for the Lanterns show that's coming out. So I want to get to know the characters a bit more. I want to get to know maybe the Flash as well. I'll check out some of those stories and slowly just continue building my library and getting to know these characters, because I love DC characters. I'm not getting into Marvel books yet, focusing on DC for now, but maybe someday once I get well acquainted with the DC stories. But I'm loving them so far, and Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow for me was a really, really great introduction to that. And I love the art in this. I think it's really beautiful. I really am looking forward to seeing how production designers and art directors interpret this for the film. And I can't wait to sit in the theater and watch this story that I've read and, looked at with this beautiful artwork come to life on the big screen with live action characters and cool grand set pieces. So if you have any recommendations for a new comic book reader that wants to get further into DC, I want to get to know those characters that I don't know much about or have never heard of, and even characters that I do know a lot about, but get to know some of their well-known stories. Do let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this book from the perspective of someone who had never read a proper comic book before, and I loved it. That's all I can really say about it. And I think I'm going to reread it soon to ingest more of the story and more of the artwork and get to enjoy it and savor it a little bit more. So that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more in my comic book reading journey. All right, see ya. Thanks.